Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Jason Cohen with us. Jason, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jason, you are the founder of WP Engine, but you're also the first guest on Growth Hacker TV to make a second appearance. Your first
Yeah.
episode was one of the most watched and talked about interviews, so I'm sure this one will be no different. So thank you so much for coming on a second time.
Wait, was that supposed to alleviate pressure or add pressure? I can't
You
tell.
know, I want to add pressure because I want high value in this, so
Okay.
feel the pressure. Make it great.
Okay.
So last time you came on, and I recommend people going and listening to that one if they haven't, and then listening to this one because it's almost like a saga, and this is part two. But the last time we talked about the initial validation of WP Engine, what you actually did to find out that people actually were willing to pay for this, and how to know that it was the right direction to go in as a business as opposed to your other ideas. And we're not going to revisit those topics. So we talked about acquiring new users. But lately, you've been writing about a second scaling problem, not the issue of acquiring new users, the issue of infrastructure as a business to really handle those users. And in a recent blog post, you said, scale causes rare events to become regular. I think that's a great quote. What do you mean by that? Scale causes rare events to become regular.
Well, so we have 1,500 servers now. So you figure a server probably fails every 4 years. I mean, the hardware, some catastrophic thing, who knows? A power supply goes out, kernel panics, drive is corrupted in some way. And so it's not surprising that a server would fail every 4 years on average. So does your laptop. It's not even doing as much as a server, right?
Sure.
But if you have 1,500 servers, that's about 4 years worth of days. So that means every day, something that would happen only once every 4 years, like a catastrophic failure, happens every single day. And that's something very rare and catastrophic. Of course, things that are slightly less rare happen by the dozens every day. And so things that are rare probably are hard to detect, might be hard to fix. I mean, just by their very nature, they're weird. That makes them hard. And yet they're commonplace in time. And so that means you're constantly having to deal with difficult things to find and fix all the time. That just sounds hard right off the face of it.
Yeah, and so kind of in a nutshell, that is the second scaling problem. The first scaling problem is, does anybody want what you're selling? The second scaling problem is rare events, which are very difficult, become regular. Does that sum it up?
Yeah, there's kind of two things, at least, in the scaling part. One is what you're referring to, which is the sort of infrastructure stuff, where there's things. If there's things like servers, network connections, database entries, things, and that you have millions of them or billions of them and so on. We also, for example, serve more than 1 billion objects a day. So, if there was a problem 1 in 1 billion times, we'd see that every day as well. So there's things you have that sort of that problem, that something that is a lot of standard deviations away, you experience all the time. The other problem I would say is humans. So some companies can scale without adding humans, which is great. Instagram had huge numbers with very few humans. So did WhatsApp and so on. But we also know those are rare, right? That's great.
That's why we know their name.
Yeah, that's terrific. Good for them, right? But also that's the exception, even in high tech. That's the exception, right? And so having a lot of people is hard, but not because of rare things becoming common, but because it's just hard for a large group of people to work together. And that's even if they all have a great culture, if they all see eye to eye and so on. It's just hard to stay on the same page. It's hard to communicate about everything with each other. It's impossible for any one person, even the CEO, to know everything that's happening at any given time. So people always have imperfect information. As you get much bigger, you have issues of physicality, like you're not in the same place, splitting up, or you may have that from the beginning if you have remote workers, which again is really awesome, but everyone will tell you it also takes a lot of work to make that happen. So whichever way you cut it up, it's work and difficult.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You have the technology has to scale, but the people that have to deal with the technology also has to scale, and the people that don't deal with technology, just the whole thing has to scale. Is that what you mean when you say your ability to handle problems morph too? Is that what that quote means? The people side of it, or is that something else?
Yeah, some of that is people and some of it's your customers. So for example, if we have one of these rare 1 in 1,500 events that happen, it could affect one customer, or it could affect 10, or it could affect 30 customers. If it affects 30 customers, you have issues of, like, do you still have the right email addresses? If you do, is that the right way to communicate with them? is that an email address of the billing person, or is that the technical person that can do something about it? Um, and so forth. And if that's happening again all the time and everywhere, are we always sending those emails out? I mean, and then some of them respond, and then we have to respond to those. And so if all you have is a couple hundred customers, it's pretty easy to deal with that. The data may not be out of date and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But as you just get, again, more of everything, some of that's the rarity, sure. But yeah, stuff is going to happen, and at a scale where it matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of just, well, we had a blip in downtime, but we're back because we only have 4 servers total.
Mm-hmm.
We had a blip, and so what?
Yeah.
Blipping every year is really good,
Mm-hmm.
So the consequence is also more intense, and it's something you actually have to deal with. And then if you think about it, what does it mean to deal with it? Well, there's processes and automation and keeping up with that, and who's looking after that, whose responsibility is it that continues to do well and continues to evolve? That's a person. What's their job title? Because when you only have 10 people, there's nobody's job title whose is to work on strange projects that appear only when you have scale, right? Like that's a thing. So you have to have even more people to deal with the meta issues of scale. So it's just complicated from people, process, technology, and so on.
Yeah. Do you think one of the insights in this kind of second scaling problem is building slack into the system, building slack into the amount of hours some people have, so they have extra hours to go do random stuff? Or maybe there's a person that just has more free time than you could get out of them. Or is that really the wrong way to think about it?
Well, it certainly helps, because then if a spike of anything happens, you're better prepared or better able to deal with it. So yeah, I challenge you to find any startup on earth of any size, even
Slack.
Microsoft, that has lots of Slack everywhere.
That's true.
Even if that's incredibly wise, apparently it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
One reason it's hard is usually you're trying to hire ahead of need anyway, just to keep up with your scale. This is, again, if you're a high scale business.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if we're growing 30% a quarter, and it takes about a quarter to source, interview, hire, train, and get up to speed, for example, one support rep,
Mm-hmm.
then we need to hire a quarter ahead in support reps. But if we're growing at 30% per quarter, that means we have to have 30% more people than you might say is quote unquote needed. Mm-hmm. That's already a ton of slack in terms of work, in terms of cost, in terms of everything, right? Mm-hmm. So again, you could argue, well, you need even more slack, and you might be right. But again, you're getting to some really big numbers that may not, that may be the right thing to do. You may be right, but it also may not be plausible. And even these huge, well-funded companies don't, you could pretty much say don't have slack, so it might be hard. Companies may be like the closet. Your stuff expands to fit the size closet you have.
Yeah.
So that's probably the case in companies, at least.
I think that's a great
just
response.
Materially, it seems to be what happens, right?
I think that's great. Hearing you talk about these catastrophic events and how they become normal, I think about entrepreneurship in general, and it seems like, at first we know entrepreneurship is catastrophic. Quitting your job, maybe starting a company, doing that first leap. But the way you describe it, the hits keep coming and faster. So really, it's not about can you get over one initial hump. It's do you like the lifestyle of dealing with chaos, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not until you're really big and mature that it starts to that really. It's not that there's no problems, but some of the chaos gets better.
Okay.
We're definitely not in that stage yet.
So
the thing is, as the company changes, I mean, as you go from 10 people to 80, and from 80 to 300, and 300 to 3,000, like, of course, the types of problems that you encounter change, and they're not easy ones. And who would think they're easy, right?
Yeah.
Then it makes sense that they'd be easy. And that's true in people. It's true of the technology. I mean, again, like looking at any technology company that has scaled their tech, and every one of them has all kinds of cool stuff that they had to do that was incredibly custom, and it was the only way they would get the cost that low. And you just go on and on with every single company that has scaled in tech and all the amazing stuff they do. Some of them are nice enough to blog about it, to share the knowledge of other folks, like Facebook with their open data centers. Netflix is really good at it. GitHub does that really well. You can just go on and on at the companies that share that information. But we all have to do it, and none of that sounds easy.
Mm-hmm. Now,
and to some extent, it's idiosyncratic to the company. The way that we're going to scale is going to depend on our culture, where we're located, what types of people we hire, what they're what we want to do as a company, and for those people, same thing with the tech. What stacks do you use? When is it useful to go off the cloud? Does it depend on the talent base? And so it's not that every company has completely unique needs, but you read about what WhatsApp did to scale their app and what Facebook does, what Twitter does, and so on and so forth, and they're all different, right? Even though there's principles that are definitely shared, no doubt about that, but actually the details are different. And so again, that sounds really hard. Idiosyncratic, really tough issues. Well, that just sounds hard. So no, you're not on a beach sipping martinis because of course that's really hard.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. The problem with scale is that everyone has to do it differently by definition, which means you have to chart your own course even if you get a little bit of help. Now, the next question I have for you, to so many people, growing a user base is the only problem they have because they haven't got there yet. They don't have any users, and so they're watching a lot of these episodes trying to figure out how to get my first 10 customers, first 100, first 1,000, whatever. That's their problem. But I can ask you this question because you have the customers and you've had to deal with scale of the second kind. Which is harder? To other people, the hardest part is just getting customers because they don't have them yet. But to you, is there one that's obviously harder than the other?
No, they're different challenges. So I would say that for one human being, you are going to be more capable or adept at certain kinds of challenges. And so frequently, not saying always, a tech founder could find all of this challenging. But for example, what if the tech founder is able to find algorithms and methods to make AdWords effective for scaling customers? Okay, or perhaps the product has a viral component and you actually are one of the very few to get over that critical mass and have that work. Well, then further customer development is not a problem. After that point, great. It's probably the other stuff. And a lot of tech founders are not adept at, for example, being the CEO of a large scaling company and the human problems there. But then many are, right?
Yeah, which is why the VCs fire a lot of them.
And a lot of VCs nowadays do the reverse and say, how is it that we can make those people successful with things like CEO coaches and other kinds of things, making sure that they have the right team around them to support them, and other people who are adept and have seen that path before that can work with the CEO. Like there's both. I think it's kind of an anachronism to talk about VCs that fire the founders rather than trying to do the best thing for the company. Not that never happens, but that's one of those things that were kind of undeniably true in the 90s and maybe true last decade. But I think actually you'd be hard pressed to find any VC with any real good reputation nowadays that has that attitude. Actually, that's kind of getting rare.
Yeah, that's a good thing. That's good news. Now, this whole conversation about scaling, it seems like it could almost double as an argument for why you should go into business that can charge premium prices. Because if you become a commodity, your pricing and your margins are low, then you have to have a ton of scale to make money. But what you're telling me is with a ton of scale comes all these new catastrophic problems on a daily basis that can eat up that margin. So is everything you're saying just an argument to have a premium priced business?
I think for business that is not raising money, yes.
Okay.
Because since you're funding it yourself, you literally cannot afford to invest ahead in all those things. The money coming in has to pay for it all. So it has to be enough money. There's no other way to invest in what you need for your own business. And that's true too in marketing, as we talked about last time. We spent a lot of time on that, and we should, because that's one of the primary things.
Sure.
I think if instead, and by the way, of course, I love those kind of businesses. I built several of those businesses, and I love it. So I don't prefer one or the other kind. I don't have that sort of bias. They're simply different paths. They're different goals. Yeah. If your goal, though, is to be the next Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever, then you should not be concerned with whether a particular price point will pay for scale or pay for your optimization of scale. You should be concerned with, I still think you should be concerned with business model, even though some of those companies aren't. I still think business model is important for a business. Gee, that's weird. I guess it is kind of weird, though.
It is sometimes.
Sometimes. Yes, I think that's important. But I think if the idea is, look, the whole point of this company is to have 100 million users, then you can ask, do I have a valid business model at that scale? And if the answer is yes, then the whole point of the venture funding is to get you to that point with least risk, which probably means fastest. It definitely means hiring way ahead of quote unquote need in these areas so that you can innovate as quickly as possible. It probably means that in marketing, like it means that in lots of different aspects of the business.
Yeah.
But like if I told you, look, your business is going to be unprofitable for 5 years, but you are going to get to 100 million users. And even though each of them is only paying $20 a month, you're going to be making $1 million a day in profit. Is that a good business? You'd say, of course, that's a good business. Let's do that. Even though it's not profitable along the whole way. So again, it's not right or wrong or price should be high or low. It's that whatever the goal of the business is and the end goal where you want it to be in terms of its business model and so on, like you have to decide what that is.
Yeah.
And then be consistent about how you attack that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes total sense. I mean, just it's looking at cash flow, and if you're a solo founder, if you're bootstrapping it, like you just don't have the ability to go into huge debt to get a ton of users. But if you know that on the other side that in 5 or 10 years is a great business, it makes sense to go into debt. So you join up with VCs. So it totally depends on where you're at and what your goals are. And I think that's awesome. Now in this blog post where you talked about scale of this nature, you said that you wrote the post in a sense because one of the startups that you invest in was getting ready to pitch for a Series B, and you were helping them with these kinds of things because you saw some holes in their pitch that you knew you wanted to address with them before they went and tried to go on the road with it. Now, I don't want you to give anything away so we know who this company is. That's irrelevant. But what can you tell us that was wrong with their pitch? Because that's part of it is you could say all these things we talked about. Hey, scale is hard. Black swans become, there every day. But
Right.
still, we may have bad thinking and not know it. What specifically were they going to do that would not have worked because of scale? You know what I mean?
What they were doing is not raising enough money.
Okay.
And there's an adage that you always should raise more money than you think you need. And often, just in the way that you just now said, VCs like to fire founders. Similarly, VCs always say you should raise more money than you need. And since they're trying to get you to take money, and raising more money than you need literally dilutes you more, it's easy to pass that off as a self-serving advice that's not helpful to founders. And I suppose there are instances where perhaps that's what's happening. But actually, this is correct. And the way to see that this is correct, that you need more money, is you build your business plan, you're conservative over here and optimistic over there and so on, right? You know that you're not going to execute your 18-month business plan as planned today. The only thing you know is that's not exactly how it's going to go. How is it going to be wrong? Who knows, right? All you know is it won't go like this.
Yeah.
So suppose it doesn't go quite as well on the revenue side, but you did spend according to the budget. That means
We got a
you're
problem.
running, you're spending money faster, and that's okay. Like the answer is not to go fire everyone and do that, right? Like imagine what that would do inside the company. That's clearly not the right thing to do. Yes, you'll need to lean into marketing. Yes, you'll need to focus, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, you proceed, but you'll need more money than you thought.
Yeah.
And that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Similarly, let's suppose you're way more successful with revenue than you thought. That means your spending plan was also wrong. You're going to need to spend more, at minimum on things like servers and whatnot, but there are other things. And whatever marketing is working really well, you're going to want to continue to spend into that. And again, this is for a company raising money specifically. So some of this may or may not apply to a bootstrap business.
Yeah.
I think there's other things you can do with a bootstrap business that is scaling faster than you thought. You don't necessarily have to blow more money. That's something else we can talk about. But if your goal is I'm raising money to get as big as possible, then huge, better than expected revenues is a good thing and something you want to lean into.
Yeah.
But that means trying to catch up on everything else, having to deal with scale issues sooner, having to hire ahead of needs sooner because your needs are changing faster. And again, that costs more money.
Yeah.
Especially in a SaaS business where you make the money over time, but most of the costs are up front. And so either way, you need more money. No matter how you differ from your plan, you need more money. And that's why you need more money. And that was their issue, is that they were going to, quote unquote, hit their plan with this money and just barely. And that's not going to happen. Like, even though I don't know what's going to come, I know that isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So they need more.
It's
That
why
was their
families have a
reaction on
savings
that.
account.
Yeah. And by the way, that's almost everyone learns this lesson. This is not like unique to them. This is everybody learns this lesson. That is the case. You could even make the argument here at WP Engine that even knowing that I still didn't do it enough. You absolutely could make that argument, hindsight's 2020, of course, right? So it's not fair, maybe,
Yeah.
but you absolutely could have made that argument.
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes back to our idea that we talked about earlier of Slack, and that, yeah, in a perfect world, Slack is great in a system, but when it comes to hiring people and business processes, there's really not going to be Slack because like you said, you fill up the closet however big it is. But in this scenario, when it comes to raising money, it's a one-time event or an event that only happens a few times, Series A, Series B, Series C, so you might as well make it a little bigger or quite a bit bigger because that is a way to build Slack into the system and kind of plan for those unforeseen things.
Yeah, I mean, it is foreseen that you'll need more money.
Yeah.
I guess that's the point. And yeah, you could say it's Slack or just you aren't like, even though it's not in your plan, it's going to be. You just can't represent it accurately because you don't know where it's going to come from. So you can't really put it down on paper, except that it's true.
Yeah. So now, what does a bootstrap business do? Because if I don't ask this, people are going to kill me
Yeah.
because you said you had something there and they want to know what that is.
So of course, you could just say, this is great, I'm going to continue adding a lot of customers and all that. But there's other things, like if the need is that high and it's that easy to get them, right? And so you're exploding. There are several kind of avenues you can go. Again, in a bootstrap business, I always feel like you're maximizing for profit, not for speed of growth or that kind of thing. I mean, sure, it's good, right? It's good to grow, obviously. But really, at the end of the day, you're maximizing for take cash home in your pocket.
Yep.
Some of that along the way, maybe some of that if you sell it, whatever. But one way or another, you're getting the money out of this thing. You're not so if you're scaling really fast, you can start asking, okay, how is it that I can continue to optimize these other things like profitability? Because just adding a lot of humans and whatnot may not be the kind of company you wanted to build in the first place.
Sure.
And in fact, if you did want to build a company like that, maybe you should have taken extra money so you could build that in a better way, right? So you kind of back into it that way. So for example, a lot of people raise prices at that point. There's clearly a lot of demand, and so the idea is, if I raise prices by 10%, 50%, 100%, then even if that slows my growth, well, I just said my growth was super high, and I didn't really want to deal with some of the scale aspects of that in terms of tech support, in terms of new feature development, so if I didn't really want to deal with that scale stuff, so I don't really want that growth, let's kill the growth off, not by being worse at it, but by getting more money per person, which is just pure profit in your pocket, and trade that growth rate for literally profit, right?
Yeah.
And that can change the kind of customer you have. I think if you change your prices 10%, it won't change the nature of your customer. But if you change it 10x, it might. And it might be a whole different user base, and you might have a different business on your hands, which you may like and you may not. So there's some limit to that. I do know of 2 different entrepreneurs in the last couple of years who did the 10x difference in price. Both of it succeeded, and in fact, in both cases, it didn't affect the growth rate that much.
Yeah. Did it
which
transform
just
their
proves how
business?
good of an idea that was.
Yeah. Did it transform the kind of business they were in, like actually what they did?
Yes, it did, but in a way that they ended up liking, right?
Okay.
But again, that's the sort of flag, is that it might do that, and it might not work, right? That might put you in such a different place in terms of business that it's bad, right? So there's a warning. But you can change prices a bit, certainly, to bleed off that growth. So that's an example.
No, I that quote you just said, it literally just it made me learn something hearing it. You're trading growth for profit. And I thought, that is exactly what is happening. I never heard it put in that kind of proverb form. And so now it makes sense, where Facebook is doing the opposite. They're trading profit for growth, or at least they were until, they have a liquidity event. Like you said, the WhatsApp and, the Instagrams, they're trying to get as much growth as possible, and they don't care about profitability. So in a sense, there's this scale, and you're either going to be on the far right or the far left or somewhere in the middle, and it's profitability on one side and growth on the other, and you got to decide what kind of business you're going to be at and where you're going to land on that continuum. Is that true? Or?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook, we probably shouldn't get into it because it's not really relevant to any of us, definitely not me.
Yeah, sure.
They're trading, they can't 10x their growth because there's not that many human beings on Earth.
They can 6x
so they're trading for strategy. How is it that they are a 30-year or 100-year-old company someday? And, because they're in the media and at scale and all these kind of things. Of course, they want to grow, right? And it needs to feed into their entire ad strategy and other revenue strategies. But human growth is maybe part of it, but it's more media and control and strategy. Like we don't think
more
about that
strategic.
ever, right? Because, and I imagine a lot of the people watching don't either. Like
Yeah,
those are very different, yet again, problems to have. By the
exactly.
way, a good indication that it never gets easier, because these problems are hard, but how about the problem of literally thinking about how to be a 30-year-old company
Hmm.
in tech where everything changes dramatically every decade? How is it that you then do that?
Yeah.
What are the trends to do or not do? Those aren't easy questions either. It
Well,
doesn't get
and that
easier.
that might lead into my next question, because my next question is, what is the third growth challenge, if there is one? First is getting customers. Second is the infrastructure of having those customers. What's third? Running out of customers and being Facebook? I mean,
Well, actually, so running out of customers is another way of saying kind of saturating the available market.
hmm
Yes, at some point, companies all sort of plateau off the other side of that growth curve just because there aren't as many customers and they're more expensive to acquire.
hmm
The more expensive to acquire is the more interesting one because that kicks in way earlier than actually tapping out the customers available.
all right.
You could argue Oracle's pretty much tapped out the large database market. It is what it is. They fight over them with IBM and a few other players, and they're basically fighting over things that exist, right?
hmm
So there's an example. Now, again, like we're not in that case, and probably no one watching this is in that case. But here's something that all of us, including the people watching here, would run into. So rather than running out of customers, marketing channels running out, absolutely.
hmm
So in other words, if you've figured out AdWords, that's great, and you're able to spend $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month, eventually, in a long-term profitable way.
hmm
You will find that you've tapped out what is efficient in AdWords. There's only so many searches, and that does increase over the years, but not a lot actually.
hmm
And so you're tapped out in that particular channel. And then furthermore, channels typically degrade.
Yeah.
So more people will bid on those AdWords over time, not fewer. And that means they're more expensive, and so it gets less efficient.
hmm
Furthermore, in things like AdWords and other things that are auction-based, and actually most things that are zero-sum games like affiliates as well, the price is set by the dumbest bidder. So even if a company comes in and they're spending this money, you're like, they have to be losing money here.
They
Maybe
are.
they are, but it doesn't matter because that's what's happening. And you can say how stupid they are all day long. It may or may not be, in fact, smart for them.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's what's going on. And so that means you're slot 4, not 1, or it's more expensive or whatever. One way or another, it's less efficient. So in other words, even when you figure out channels, they tend to get less efficient and less productive over time.
Yeah.
In any way they top out. And that's something that everyone finds. And so that's why it's important in SaaS or any company really, I suppose, to find more and more channels, because that's what happens. And so it's great if you're scaling at a certain rate, but actually it'll tail off if you're not developing new channels and so on.
Yeah. Now this next
So
question
channels is an area. But I mean, there's lots of other things like, we said people and infrastructure scale, but they do change in nature yet again. So for example, an infrastructure example would be you finally realize you have to have multiple data centers around the world, and the issues of data integrity and sharing and failover and such, when you have those kind of latencies, is actually a whole nother engineering issue, and it's unlikely that all the code is perfectly ready for that, right? So that's an example of like a second order scaling thing. Challenge that can come later. Another one in people is again one of physicality. So, at WP Engine we have 110 people, so we're still all in one big area. But what happens when we can't fit here? And so we have another floor, or another building, or it's another state, or and you keep going, because it's inevitable those things happen. And of course, communication becomes orders of magnitude worse when that happens. And so even if you thought you had things figured out, then there's that. And so that's an example on people where it kind of bifurcates yet again. Of course, everyone knows Dunbar's number 150 is the sort of magic number of humans where these communications break down even if everyone is in the same physical place, where it's hard to remember everyone's name anymore. Even at that level, much less communicate with them about stuff, right? If you can't remember their name, you certainly can't remember other things that are important about interacting with them and working with them. And so, what do you? That's a whole different kind of problem to solve. So yeah, it doesn't stop coming in, and then the business challenges change too. So an example there for us, we get approached a lot by people that say, "Hey, I've got this plugin. I think a lot of your users would like it. Why don't you promote it to your customers?" And Of course, we don't want to just promote things to our customers. Like that would be a violation of the trust. Like, look, we're just hosting. We don't want to start selling you stuff, right? Like that would be a bad use of our email base. But you could say, well, what if we did something together, like a new offering that combined it, or there's like things that wouldn't be bad to do, right? That are accretive and not like just selling into our base kind of stuff. But usually when you do the math on it, you realize like this could only possibly generate $1 million a year in revenue, max ever. And actually that's already completely uninteresting and wouldn't move the needle for us this year. So in other words, so that's just a long way of saying another thing of scale is the opportunities you go after have to get much bigger. And that's harder. Like it's hard to find really big opportunities that can be 100 million in revenue or $1 billion in revenue. There's not just thousands of things that can generate $1 billion of revenue. And so do you have to create a new market, or do you have to be that disruptive in a market? Like that's really hard and a totally different challenge than eating into an existing market. And so the nature of that is different and much harder. And of course, attacking it is a bigger trajectory. It's not like one person goes off and works on something. This is there a whole team of people, and what are they doing, and how do you measure success early? And it's actually really hard to do all that stuff, and yet those are the only things that are going to positively change the trajectory of the company. And so you have to tackle problems like that. So those are things I'd lump into that third order of things.
No, that's awesome. And again, it's theoretical for a lot of us, but it may not be at some point, and it's good to kind of have a touch point there. One of the things I think about is you talk about these scaling problems. I think about Amy Hoy, and she had an app that she was trying to scale and ran into some serious problems with it. And people on like Hacker News gave her the hardest time because rookie engineers just think everything's easy. And I looked in the comments of your blog post, and somebody was in there saying, "Oh, data redundancy, fail safes, backups. This stuff's easy." Like, and that's the problem, is that until you've dealt with scale, you just think it's easy. When in fact, WP Engine is dealing with things that possibly no other company in the world has ever dealt with. Not because you guys are so awesome, but because that's what business is like at scale. What do you have to say to the people that just think they know it all when it comes to scale, when in fact they don't?
Yeah, actually, what's maybe the very worst are the people that do know what they're talking about at scale, and they have built those, because a lot of times they're right. It's just maybe unconstructive the way they're coming about it, right? It's like, hey, it'd be actually great if you could come help, but complaining on Hacker News is not really a great way to do that, right? Yeah, of course. It's like anything. It's like people who have never built a company who don't understand what it means to quit your job, what it means to watch your bank account go down, what it means to take this idea that you have no idea whether it'll work. You just really want it to really badly. Of course you can never have enough evidence that it will work. Of course you can. No one can.
Yeah.
You know that, and yet you've told all your friends and family, coworkers that this is what you're doing, and put that of much of your life and reputation in. You can say those words all you want, but someone who hasn't done it doesn't understand. And shoot, that's a lot worse than the scaling thing, but it's the same kind of thing. Or having kids. Having kids will change your life. I can tell you that, but if you haven't had kids, you don't really know what that means.
Yeah.
And until you have been in that place where everyone with kids will know exactly what I mean, when you're sitting there with that baby and it's dusk outside and you look out the window and think, I wonder if the sun's coming up or going down.
Yep.
And if you've had kids, you're just like, yes. And if you haven't, you can intellectually completely understand what I just said, but it's not the same thing. Yeah. So look, having kids is much bigger deal than starting a company, which is much bigger deal than scale issues, but they are the same principle.
No, that is the best analogy. I have newborn twins at home right now and a 4-year-old, which means sometimes my workday starts at 2 or 3 a.m. Not because that's when I wanted to get up, but because that's when I'm getting up. And when my single friends or friends that are married without kids want to give me advice, I actually just don't even hear them anymore. It can't be helpful because they have no clue what they're talking about.
That's right.
That's great. I love that. Well, again, this has been an awesome interview, and I do have 2 last questions for you.
Sure.
I'm actually really excited about this next one. I just got done reading a book about habits, and so I'm just thinking right now in my own life a lot about habits, and so I'm excited to get to kind of pose this question to you. Because you've grown multiple successful companies, what are the most important personal habits that you think have led to your success? What do you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever that makes it a habit that you think really made a difference in your life?
I think there's 2 categories of things. I mean, not a false dichotomy, but you can split it up into two if you want. There's sort of the principle that nobody has more than 24 hours in a day and everyone has to sleep. So how do you optimize the time you have? I think a good analogy to think of there is there's a fun math problem. So I'm traveling from here to, let's say I'm in Austin. So let's say I'm traveling to San Antonio, which is 60 miles away. And I want to get there, I want to average 60 miles an hour. That's what I want my average velocity to be. So I get started and there's traffic. So I'm an hour in and I've only gone 30 miles. In other words, my current average is 30 miles an hour, right? How fast do I have to go to make up for that so that my total trip does in fact average at 60? Just guess.
Seems like 90 is the answer, but it probably isn't.
90, 120, something like that. The answer is you can go the speed of light and you will not get there in an average speed of 60 because you've already spent an hour to go half the trip. And to
you're out of time. Average 60,
to average 60, you have to have gone the whole 60 miles in 1 hour. So it'll take a little bit longer and you'll average more. And the takeaway from that fun math example is that the math is that if you're slow at some stuff, it literally does not matter how fast you are at other things, you are slow. And you actually can't make up for it by being faster at other stuff. You actually have to tackle the things you're slowest at. That's where the win is. And it's just math.
Yeah.
So knowing that as the sort of a mental model, you start asking, what am I slow at, and or what do I spend my time on? And you optimize from that direction of the stack. So for a lot of people, it's email, of course. So you start asking, how do I do less email? How do I receive less email? How do I process it smarter? How do I unsubscribe from things or tell people to go away or change my email address? And then how do I stay at inbox 0 after that, right? So emails, just because that's a lot of people's answer, right, or result. Of course, you have to look at yourself. One trick to do this is you keep a log literally of everything you do all day, including task switching on the computer. It's extremely tedious, and usually you can't do it for many days before you just go crazy and stop. But you don't even have to do any metrics or math or anything. You just, by having to write it down all the time, you'll already just know what those top things are just because you're sick of writing them. You're like, I got it. Like, you don't even have to do analysis. So that's, again, a very super easy, no math, no anything, just use a pad of paper even way to find out what those things are and address them or eliminate them somehow. So that kind of mental model is one thing. And so, and of course, that implies things like good at, inbox 0 and good to-do processing with prioritization and all that kind of stuff, right? It's kind of obvious. So that's one thing, time optimization. The second thing is just sort of personal optimization. If you exercise regularly, you will be smarter and have better attention span, and you'll feel better, and you'll be able to work better than if you don't. And if you get enough sleep, same thing. And if you meditate, same thing. And if you eat right, same thing. And we all know that. We all know all those things. And of course, there's studies about that, but who needs that? No kidding, of course. Of course. So taking care of yourself in those ways literally makes you more productive. And there's just really no argument to the other way. And I don't mean one time you didn't, you had to go nuts for 1 week to get something. Of course that, right? And we're talking about lifestyle, not temporary things. Of course, temporary things. So that kind of correct or right lifestyle, if we're using Buddhist terminology, right lifestyle, right view, right stuff like that. It's huge, it's obvious, and people don't do it because it's hard, but it's true.
Yeah, and the things you rattled off, it kind of makes, it's almost like that is life, It's what you eat, it's meditation, clearing your mind, it's how much you sleep. It's just, there's not a lot of other variables. There's 5 to 10, and if you get those right, like, it goes pretty well.
You're maximized. Otherwise, you're just not. And again, like, we all know that. I'm not saying anything we don't know, right? But are you doing it?
And we don't do it because we're too busy, but we'd actually have more time if we did it, because we'd be thinking smarter and working more efficiently and be more tuned. And so it's like we have to make the time and bite the bullet on the front end to probably have a more optimized life overall.
My wife also had her own business for almost a decade, and she had a great thing on this topic of, I'm too busy to do it, kind of a cycle, which is there's always an infinite amount to do. No matter what, there's always an infinite amount more, and they're all good ideas. They all would be better. They make you more money or more fit, whatever, all of them. There's always an infinite number. So whether you get through 12 or 11 of them today is actually not as important as you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're just, spending the rest of that time twiddling your thumbs, I guess then you're not
Yeah,
okay.
work
But
harder.
if you're spending it making all of those working hours maximal, because you're taking care of yourself and being healthy, of course that's the right trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
And no, getting one thing done, quote unquote, which done worse, done slower, done in every way worse, while you probably burn out due to health issues. Clearly, that's the wrong choice.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Infinite number of things, getting a few less done a day. Eat better instead. So
Yeah.
This last question, I asked to you last time. I honestly don't remember your answer, and you probably don't either. But I'm going to ask it again because people are always evolving and they have new things to share. So what's the best advice you have for any startup that's trying to grow?
I think last time I said raise your prices because that was one of the themes. So it's probably still true. But let's do a new one.
All right.
Trying to grow. Well, so let's assume early on. My best advice is to double down on what's working instead of running off to find the next thing that could also work. So in other words, a lot of people, they'll get one channel working okay. SEO, or blogging, Twitter ads, Google ads, Facebook ads, I don't know, conferences, direct mail, whatever, right? They
Door
get
to door.
something to work. And then the mentality is, great, I have that working. I'm going to continue to optimize it, continue to see what I can get out of it. But since I've got that down and that's rolling, I'm going to now look for the second thing to add even more growth to the company. And eventually, that's a good idea. We just talked about that, right? I feel like early on, though, people are too quick to run away from that thing. And the way to think of it is, if your immediate goal at any time is probably to double the company as quickly as you can. Right? That's like a
goal.
reasonable way to think about your next. Like 10x, sure, but that's kind of hard to even think about what that's going to be like because it's so much bigger, right? 2x, though, you kind of still can see what it's like, and only a few things might break between now and then, especially early, right? That's a reasonable goal all the time. So if you've just gotten a marketing campaign working, probably there's 2x left in it. So your easiest, quickest, highest ROI, blah, blah, blah way to get to 2x right now is to flog that campaign, to take what's working and really make it work and get 2x, 3x out of it.
Yeah.
Now, at some point, you can, you really start maturing into that, like, no, you keep squeezing this rock and no blood's coming out, or you hire a firm to run that, or you hire an employee to run it. In other words, you actually put a lot of attention on it so that it really is going, quote unquote, at the same time for real as starting a new thing. Well, then, Now we're talking, right? Like, of course, you get to the point, and maybe even quickly, where you need to do another thing. But I think people run off to the next thing rather than realizing their easiest way to double right this second is to double what's already working. So again, the one sentence is double down on what's already working.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, you think about it, and it's almost like I enjoy marketing. It's fun to me, and so I can think it's fun to try a new channel instead of let's think business-wise, not marketing-wise. If this channel is working, let's double down. And a quick thing, I think I've shared this before with people, but I'm really tall. I'm like 6'4", 6'5". So when I play basketball, if I mix match and I got a short guy, I literally stand in the basket, they throw it to me, and I make a layup. And I'll do it until the game's over because that's what doubling down means. If something's working, you don't stop. And people can say it's unoriginal, uninventive, boring. I don't care. I'm going to win the game. So
that's right. Well, and that's right. And there's other ways too besides just the channel. Like, for example, who are you selling to? So sometimes, again, you get good at selling to SMB, small business, and then you decide, well, now that I have that under my belt, let's attack enterprise. And again, like SMB is really big. Probably don't need to go attack enterprise and take that on yet. I mean, even though that may be a fantastic idea.
And there's new scaling problems with infrastructure.
But if you ask, how do I get 2x or even 10x, probably don't need to go there. So, getting that next small business account, using the case studies from your existing small business account and the referenceable customers that are like them and the marketing messages that are working. And, you're going to 2 events a year, but you could go to 5, right? In other words, because it's working, you can get more. So rather than giving yourself literally brand new challenges and not being able to reuse or depend on the things you've already earned, that's just harder. And unless you've tapped that out, or again, you have such an organization around it that is able to continue improving and growing it really autonomously, so that in fact a second organization that's tackling something related or adjacent really does make sense. Until you're there, you're just not using the things you've literally already earned for yourself, and just not taking the easiest path to that 2x. And even if you're right that is a place to go at some point, people tend to do that too quickly.
That's great advice to end on. Jason, thank you so much again for coming on Growth Hacker TV.
You bet. Thanks.